She came home with her shoulders aching and her feet numb, the dark green nurse scrubs clinging faintly to her skin from a double shift that refused to end quietly in her bones. Amina Okoye dropped her bag by the door. Already tasting the silence she had been craving since sunrise, when a soft metallic clink echoed from the kitchen, precise and deliberate, followed by the low rush of running water. Her breath caught halfway out, fingers tightening around the strap in her hand, pulse thudding hard enough to feel in her throat as she stepped forward on instinct rather than logic. The apartment lights were on, warmer than she remembered leaving them, and the smell of lemon cleaner cut through the familiar scent of antiseptic that seemed permanently woven into her clothes. She turned the corner slowly, heart hammering, and stopped so abruptly that the world tilted for a second. A tall man stood at her sink, sleeves rolled neatly to his forearms, drying a plate with careful focus, like the task mattered. He looked up at the sound she made, dark eyes steady, face calm in a way that felt impossible given everything she knew. "You're home earlier than I expected," he said gently, setting the plate aside, as if he had every right to be there. Amina's voice came out sharp despite the exhaustion, weighing it down. "Who are you, and how did you get into my apartment?" He didn't flinch at her tone, only inclined his head slightly. "My name is June Park," he replied, measured and respectful, "and I used the spare key under the plant, the one you thought no one noticed." Her jaw tightened, anger fighting fear as she took in the expensive watch, the tailored posture, the unmistakable presence of a man used to being obeyed. "You broke into my home," she said flatly, stepping back just enough to keep space between them. June shook his head once. "I didn't come to hurt you," he said, voice low, "and I will leave if you ask, but first I need you to hear why I'm here." She laughed, a brittle sound born from fatigue and disbelief. "You think cleaning my dishes gives you the right to explain yourself," she shot back. His gaze softened, something like regret passing through it. "No," he said quietly. "I think the truth does." Amina crossed her arms, muscles trembling with the effort of staying upright, refusing to let him see how close she was to unraveling. "Start talking," she said, "and make it fast." June gestured to the chair, then stopped himself, choosing instead to remain standing as if to level whatever invisible imbalance sat between them. "2 years ago," he began, "you reported a nurse supervisor for skimming supplies and forcing overtime without pay." Her stomach dropped, memories surfacing sharp and unwanted. "That complaint disappeared," she said bitterly. "So, did the investigation," he nodded. "Because the company that runs your hospital launders money through several shell vendors," he admitted, "and those vendors answer to people under my protection." Silence stretched between them, thick and suffocating, broken only by the hum of the refrigerator. "You're telling me my life fell apart because of you," she said, voice trembling despite her effort to keep it steady. "I'm telling you it happened because I wasn't paying attention," June replied, shoulders squaring as if bracing for impact. "I let men under me exploit systems I didn't bother to examine closely enough." Her laugh this time was hollow. "So you show up to apologize," she said, "like this fixes anything." He met her gaze without blinking. "I'm here to take responsibility," he said firmly, "and to stop it." She turned away, pressing her palms to the counter, fighting the sting behind her eyes as anger tangled with something more dangerous, something like hope she didn't trust. "Responsibility doesn't give me back the nights I slept in my car," she said quietly. "It doesn't erase how small they made me feel." June stepped closer but stopped at a respectful distance, his voice lowering. "I know," he said. "That's why words aren't enough." She spun back toward him. "Then why are you still talking?" she demanded. He reached into his jacket slowly, deliberately, and set a thick folder on the table between them. "Because action has to start somewhere," he replied. Inside were documents, names she recognized, dates burned into her memory, and evidence detailed enough to make her knees weaken. "I've already shut down the contracts," he continued. "There will be arrests." Amina stared, fingers hovering over the pages as if they might vanish. "Why me?" she whispered. June's expression shifted, something raw breaking through his control. "Because you were right," he said simply. "And because my daughter asked why the nurse who helped her when she broke her arm looked so tired all the time." Her breath hitched at the mention. "You have a daughter," she murmured. "Mincio," he said, a faint smile touching his lips. She's 6, and she doesn't let me forget my promises. The knock at the door startled them both, sharp and sudden. Amina stiffened, instinctively moving toward the hallway, but June was already there, opening it to reveal a small girl clutching a crumpled piece of paper, eyes wide and curious. "Appa," Mincio said, peering past him. "Is this where the nice nurse lives?" Amina froze, heart twisting as the child's gaze landed on her, bright and unguarded. "You didn't tell her," Amina said quietly. "I didn't need to," June replied, stepping aside. Mincio walked in without fear, holding out the paper. "I drew this for you," she said softly. It was a picture of a woman in green scrubs holding a hand, both smiling. Amina crouched despite the ache in her legs, tears finally spilling as she accepted it. "Thank you," she whispered. June watched them, something in his chest loosening as he said, "I want to make this right, Amina, not just for you, but because my daughter deserves to see me do better." She looked up at him, eyes wet, voice steadying. "If you're lying," she said, "I will walk away and never look back." He nodded once. "If I'm lying," he said, "I deserve that." Weeks later, the apartment felt different, lighter, as if the walls themselves had learned to breathe again. Repairs were underway at the hospital, supervisors replaced, schedules corrected, and Amina found herself sleeping through the night for the first time in months. June didn't disappear after making his promises. He showed up quietly, consistently, sometimes with Mincio in tow, sometimes alone, always respecting the boundaries Amina set. One evening, as she stirred a pot on the stove in her scrubs, he leaned against the counter and said, "You don't have to cook for us." She smiled faintly. "I want to," she replied, surprising herself with how true it felt. Mincio giggled from the table. "You smell happy," the child declared. June met Amina's eyes over the steam rising between them, something warm and tentative passing in the silence. "I'm glad you let us stay," he said softly. Amina exhaled, the weight on her chest easing just a little. "I'm glad you kept your word," she answered, and for the first time since he'd appeared in her kitchen, the fear gave way to something fragile and real, something that felt like the beginning rather than the end. The change did not arrive all at once, and Amina noticed that almost immediately, because real safety never crashed into a life like a miracle but crept in through small, consistent proofs. June stopped knocking because she told him she hated the sound, and instead texted before arriving, waiting outside until she said it was all right to come up. When Mincio visited, she took off her shoes carefully and lined them up by the door without being asked, then followed Amina from room to room, asking thoughtful questions about bandages, heart monitors, and why people cried when they were scared. One evening, after Mincio fell asleep on the couch with a coloring book still open on her chest, June stood at the window, hands clasped behind his back, and said quietly, "She talks about you at home." Amina raised an eyebrow, folding a blanket over the child. "That sounds dangerous," she replied, though her voice lacked real bite. He smiled faintly. "She says you fix people even when you're tired," he said, then added more softly, "She asks why no one fixed you." The words settled heavy between them, and Amina felt her throat tighten as she turned away, pretending to straighten the cushions. "I don't need fixing," she said after a moment. June nodded slowly. "I know," he answered. "But I still want to help." She faced him then, studying the way he held himself differently now, less armored, less certain. "Help means listening," she said. "Not deciding what's best for me." He met her gaze and said, "Then tell me what you need." The simplicity of the offer undid her more than any grand gesture ever could. Time moved forward in measured steps, marked by hospital shifts that no longer felt punitive and evenings that slowly softened into something resembling peace. Amina found herself laughing again, surprised by the sound each time it escaped her, especially when June attempted domestic tasks with the seriousness of a man negotiating a ceasefire. One night, he burned the rice so badly that Mincio waved smoke away dramatically and announced, "The kitchen is under attack." Amina laughed until her sides hurt, covering her mouth as June apologized with exaggerated solemnity. "I handle hostile takeovers better than stoves," he admitted. She wiped her eyes, still smiling. Lucky for you, she said. I'm very forgiving with food crimes. Their eyes met across the counter, the moment lingering just a second too long, charged with something neither of them named. Later, as they washed dishes together, their hands brushed and both froze, breath catching in unison. June withdrew immediately, voice careful. I'm sorry, he said. Amina shook her head, surprising herself by saying, You don't have to be afraid of me. He looked at her then, really looked, and replied, I'm not afraid of you. I'm afraid of hurting you. The honesty in his voice settled deep in her chest, warming a place that had been cold for a long time. The first real test came quietly, without drama, which somehow made it harder. Amina's brother Malik showed up unannounced one afternoon, his expression tight and suspicious the moment he saw June's car outside. Inside the apartment, Malik crossed his arms and said bluntly, So this is the guy. June inclined his head respectfully. I'm June Park, he said. Malik snorted. I know who you are, he replied. I also know men like you don't do anything unless it benefits them. Amina tensed, but June answered calmly. You're right, he said. I spent years confusing benefit with control. Malik studied him, unimpressed. And now, he pressed. June glanced at Amina before answering. Now I benefit by becoming someone my daughter can respect, he said. And someone your sister doesn't have to fear. Malik held his stare for a long moment, then turned to Amina. If he hurts you, Malik said quietly. I don't care who he is. Amina met her brother's eyes and replied, I know. When Malik finally left, June exhaled slowly. He loves you, he said. Amina nodded. He's protecting me, she corrected gently. June smiled faintly. As he should. The night June finally told her everything, it was raining softly against the windows, the city blurred into streaks of light beyond the glass. Mincio was asleep in the spare room, breathing deep and even, and the apartment hummed with quiet. June sat across from Amina at the small table, hands wrapped around a mug he hadn't touched. There are things about my life that don't disappear just because I want them to, he said carefully. Amina listened, heart steady but alert. I know, she replied. He looked relieved by that, then continued, explaining the weight of responsibility, the people who still watched him, the work it took to dismantle systems without letting worse ones replace them. I won't lie to you, he said. I am still dangerous to some people. Amina considered his words, then asked, and to me, he shook his head immediately. Never, he said. Not if I have a choice. She held his gaze, then said quietly, Then don't take my choice away. He nodded, emotion flickering across his face. I won't, he promised. When he reached across the table this time, she didn't pull back, letting her fingers rest against his, the contact gentle but grounding. We're not rushing this, she said. June smiled softly. I wouldn't dare. The commitment did not come wrapped in declarations or dramatic kisses, but in presence, in mornings where June made coffee before her shift, and evenings where Amina helped Mincio with homework while June listened from the doorway. One night, as Amina changed out of her dark green scrubs, she caught June watching her reflection in the mirror, his expression open and unguarded. What? She asked, amused. He hesitated, then said, I was thinking how strong you are. She studied him, then replied, Strength isn't never needing help. He nodded. I'm learning that, he said. Later, as they sat on the couch with Mincio curled between them, half asleep, Amina rested her head against June's shoulder without thinking, and he went perfectly still before relaxing into the moment. This feels nice, Mincio murmured. Amina smiled. It does, she agreed. June closed his eyes briefly, voice thick when he said, I don't want to lose this. Amina squeezed his hand. Then keep choosing it, she said. The future did not promise ease, but it promised honesty, and that felt like more than enough. On a quiet morning, months later, Amina stood in the kitchen watching June fix a loose cabinet hinge while Mincio hummed softly at the table, drawing another picture. She felt a warmth settle in her chest, not the dizzy rush of infatuation, but the steady glow of something earned. June caught her watching him and smiled. What? He asked. She shook her head. Nothing, she said, then corrected herself. Everything. He crossed the room, stopping just short of her, giving her space even now. "Amina," he said gently. "I don't know what this becomes." She reached for his hand, lacing her fingers through his.
"Neither do I," she replied.
"But I know I'm not afraid anymore." His grip tightened slightly, reverent. "Then we keep going," he said. She nodded, leaning in until their foreheads touched, the apartment quiet around them, filled not with perfection, but with trust, warmth, and the simple, powerful choice to stay.